I gave you all I own, put you on this golden throne, but I'm a little stronger now.
What's up, Ego Hackers? Welcome to the CS Joseph podcast. I'm your host, CS Joseph, and we have our very own John Bodine, Uber guest extraordinaire, expert on all of the things Jungian analytical psychology, joining us this evening. And tonight we're discussing the 4 octagram variants according to Strass and Howe. And John, John recently released an article that was out
yesterday. Yeah,
yesterday.
On Sunday. I think this video will be released in a couple of days. Which you've been on the 4th turning since day 1.
Yeah,
and I think you've made all of us read it. And then,
yes. If you haven't read the 4th turning, what the hell are you doing with your life? Yeah. I had Glenn Beck shove that down my throat many years back when I cared about Glenn Beck, and then ever since 9/11/2012, with what happened at Benghazi, I stopped caring about Glenn Beck, and I'm glad that I stopped ever since. Anyway, what an interesting ENP that guy is. I mean, he's like Alex Jones light, maybe. Alex Jones light, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, the 4th turning is a fascinating book, and I'm glad you turned all of us onto it. It's kind of in some of your own content, you can take the 4th turning and really put it into a psychological frame, and that's actually how the octagram variants came about. If you want to share with Lane and kind of what he brought to the table.
Yeah. So when we originally Chris Taylor, like we were looking at the octagram, we knew that there was a neutral expression, a neutral only expression of the Enneagram. We knew that there was a thing to that.
The Enneagram or the octagram?
Well, from a neutral only expression of the Enneagram that we turned into the octagram after stripping away the natural components, focusing on what really is the thing that matter to people the most in life, and that's cognitive origin. And then that's where you ran forward with the temple wheels, and then from your contribution with the temple wheels, then Chris Taylor came up with the concept of, okay, we have this thing called cognitive focus that we talk about all the time. However, there's just more to it, because from an introverted sensing perspective, there is a cognitive development, which is a person's life experience, and then cognitive focus is the direction that someone is going. And that's where we came up with these, letter interpretations of the 4 variants.
It was a brilliant, this is just a small insight that was like this linchpin moment that just exploded our system to capture the octagram themes. That period was really fun. It was about like a year and a half ago. I don't think most people know, but Chris and I were doing our own thing. You and Robert were doing your own thing, and then we'd come together every creative week, every creative meeting, and just workshop, and we do that for months and months. And then from
the
that
debates,
they
were so fiery.
And from that came the octagram.
And field testing the octagram has been extreme joy, if I do say so myself.
Yeah, and that's sort of, I think, what we both feel that your system, the 4 sides plus the octagram offers, is a front-to-back unified personality system that we don't feel is really emulated elsewhere. I think it's unique.
Entirely unique.
Yeah.
I mean, sure, there's roots with Carl Jung, MBTI, those types of things, but the octagram itself, from a neutral perspective, is basically the one thing that really sets us apart from a definitive perspective, on top of cognitive origin, on top of the temple wheels and the 4 temples. Like we have absolutely expanded this science in ways that most people cannot even fathom. And what I mean by most people, I'm talking like our psychological contemporaries. That's what I'm talking about in terms of most people. The other cutting edge psychologists out there who are leading the way of understanding the human mind, and we've basically blown them all out of the water. And one of the ways that we blew them out of the water came from Mr. Lane, who is one of our mods on our Discord server. By the way, if you're not on the Discord yet, get on it. It's discord.gg/egohackers. Get involved. You can even talk to Lane about this if you want, just at Lane, and then in the Octagram channel, discuss Octagram. He'll be happy to have that discussion. But you can actually search his messages and see some of the arguments that he put forward, combining Strass and Howe theory with the Octagram. And again, Strass and Howe theory comes from the book The 4th Turning. Everyone needs to read that book, for sure.
So in the 4th Turning, they have these cycles labeled, which Lane extrapolated to the Octagram. And in the 4th Turning, the the main cycle labels were, one generation has a high, and then the following generation has an awakening. The following generation after that has an unraveling, and then in crisis after that it's the cycle, right? And then they have another set of terms for that, which is growth, maturation, entropy, and destruction. So Lane took those two sets and took their work, and then was able to repurpose that for the octagram, which the 4 themes for the octagram are joy for SDSF, decay, SDUF, hope, UDSF, and then despair, UDUF. So I guess can we go into one of those a little bit at a time?
Yeah, sure.
Go from there. So the SDSF is joy. Can you talk a little bit about why SDSF is joy and what that?
The reason why it's joy is because so if you're looking at it from an individual perspective, an SDSF variant, they gain joy because they are all about being enabled in childhood as well as enabled in adulthood. And in fact, they've gone out of their way to protect their enablement and protect their joy. And it's like, hey man, you're down on my vibes, get out of my life, that kind of person. And they're very intolerant of anyone who is basically who is not enabling them and who is not contributing to their joy energy, basically. They're very intolerant to that perspective.
I think one of the things I've seen from SDSF types, which you could see them being the furthest away from despair, is that they don't really understand despair types very well. The UDUF, they can't really relate. Whereas I don't know what the UDUF perspective of the joy type is, but joy types, there was a protective development into their subconscious where their child and inferior were taken care of, and there's this kind of self-assurance.
Very sheltered that led to that self-assurance, right. But then they continue to shelter themselves and expect shelterment from other people in their lives and also from their environment. They will defend the sheltering. And anyone that gets in the way of that sheltering, they freak out, basically. And it's actually where SDSF people can be really combative because they are intolerant of people who don't shelter them, basically, I've noticed.
Yeah, so the SDSF joy, and then the SDUF next, which is decay. And then I know we talked about the SDUF being the rude awakening octagram, where it's like, oh shit, I'm not SDSF.
Everything I was enabled as a child is not it's like your parent cheering you on for winning Halo tournaments and playing video games, right?
Right.
But that's not going to help you in adulthood.
Right. You were enabled to things that were actually destructive to your maturity.
Yeah, exactly.
So when I did the Robert Greene article and video, you and I had a discussion because I at first thought he was SDSF, and then you were talking and you was like, no, he's SDUF. And you told me he did not write that book from a place of joy, the 48 Laws of Power. And if you listen to Robert Greene, it's all about, he's always talking about, when I got out of college, I had no idea what hit me. This corporate world, playing all these power games, I was not ready for that. And the being not ready for it, that is kind of the decay, this awakening of like, oh God, I'm not ready for this. So,
and just like Generation Z is not ready as a generation. We call them the decay generation, right? Because they're not ready. Why? Because Generation Z has right now currently taken the biggest hit in terms of fatherlessness, because not having fathers around, not being led, and because of that, they are in this state of decay. That's the OnlyFans generation, basically, as we've stated. And just recently, a married woman asked me for advice to help optimize her OnlyFans and develop sales funnels for her so she can increase her bottom line. And I'm just like, oh my God, I cannot believe you asked me that. What?
It's fascinating because you can take these 4 variants and apply them to these wide generational themes, kind of like how God functions serve under an entire temple. That we can have a generation that is defined by decay or defined by hope, even though obviously the people within the generation will be different octagram variants. But yeah, my generation is definitely, I would say, in a generation of decay, where we're not really moving towards anything. There's a lot of listlessness. There's aimlessness. There's just kind of trying to have a good time, trying to make it big,
indulgent,
on TikTok
trying to get lucky.
Right.
You know, it's just
The
like that
expedient,
Daft
right?
Punk song where it's just trying to get lucky. You
Right.
know, and it's just like, what the hell is even happened to us?
That's exactly it. Yeah. So joy, decay, and then despair. You're probably one of the best acquainted with despair.
I appreciate that.
In the community. Can you give us a snapshot of what UDUF is?
So UDUF people are the people who have been entirely disabled in childhood, but then they're also disabled in adulthood. And like for myself, I grew up in an extremely affiliative family, and I'm the only pragmatic, for example. So I was instantly disabled, and then held to an extremely high moral standard that I was actually mentally incapable of doing. I am an amoral person because I have FI Trickster, but every single member of my family were all FJs, and expecting me, because I wasn't an FJ like them, automatically I have to be an FI user, and then they were projecting their need for FI onto me. And my FI is optimistic technically, but it is still a trickster. It's just not enough to be able to produce the FI that they needed, and they're constantly projecting FI hero and FI parent onto me on a regular basis, and I just can't be that person. And as a result of that, that's where I was entirely disabled as a child. And then as a result of political pressure, not just from my family, but also from church institutions, religious institutions, and various friend groups ultimately, as well as abusers in my life, even in my adulthood, I'm still not remotely accepted for who I am as an amoral person. I'm not allowed to be an amoral person. And so as a result of that, because of my, adoption of every principle and no principle simultaneously, because from my perspective, anything can be a good thing, anything can be a bad thing, right? And then as a result of that, you just feel entirely and utterly alone. UDUF is all about independence, forced independence, because you are in a state of survival. You are trying to survive. And sure, SDUF is also technically a form of survival mode, but UDUF is an even deeper form of survival, because at least SDUF, their survival mode can be still based on a collective. It can still be based on a group, and a group can potentially get through that survival mode and back to thrival. But the UDUF is entirely alone. It is entirely independent. It is entirely dog-eat-dog world. It is entirely cutthroat. Everything is cutthroat to a UDUF person. Just like with the ISTJs being in UDUF, survival is their justification. They always get justification for anything, and they could justify anything in their life, any action of any kind, because I'm trying to survive. That means I get to do anything that it takes to survive for the sake of survival, basically.
It's interesting because I think you hit an important point there, that SDUF types, even when they're in UF, still probably think that there's a way back to SDSF.
Yes.
Because I think the UDUF has completely separated themselves from even hope. From
They
hope
have.
at all. It's just like getting used to being in the abyss, kind of.
Yeah, getting used to, like these are the people who have to come up with their own comfort or their own will completely on their own, and they are these society's outcasts. And I have been an outcast my whole life, but then eventually I was able to become subconscious focused, because I realized that I have a lot higher value having been an outcast, because then I'm the one who's walking around with the most wisdom and the most answers and the most solutions to problems that I've already survived through, because I had those same problems. And now because of that, I'm able to be subconscious focused and basically take care of, with my ISFJ subconscious, other people and solve those same problems for other people, basically, which has allowed me to become subconscious focused, because my ISFJ is able to protect people and protect people's futures, protect people from themselves, basically. And that's how I was able to get to hope, because then I realized that because I lived in a state of despair, I am able to become the hope for others, basically, from as that result.
Because you've had to go through it, you've found little pieces of treasure that you can help other people avoid.
Yes.
Avoid. I mean, I think a lot of your work has been about trying to help people avoid the same pit that you.
Yeah, I don't want people to live my past. That is my motivation, and above all, I don't want my children to live my past.
Right.
And then if you were to ask me if my children had a future, I would say no. And that's just that coming generational despair energy that you talk about.
We're already kind of aware that the decay is happening, so that you're able to perceive that on the other side of decay is just this long winter of despair that, you know, for future generations is not looking great just yet. So that's despair. And then the last one is UDSF, the hope, which is like, you know, somewhat acquainted with the abyss, but then we're able to find other places that kind of brought them out of that.
It's like Dante's Inferno. You're going into hell, but you're emerging from hell battle hardened. You got your armor, you got your sword. You're just ready for anything, basically, and nothing can faze you. It's like, you know, we talked about this in Ego Hacking Your Fear, where, you know, like an SI user, for example, has fearlessness. Why? Because everything that they've been afraid of, they've either grown through it or they've been burned away. Yeah. It's like, I don't care. I've seen it all. I've suffered it all. Whatever. Everything has been taken away from me so many times. Big whoop. Okay, right. I can always go back to UDUF in despair survival mode anyway and survive just like I always did. I can still go back there because even when I was in UDUF, I still survived and I still was okay and I still emerged. So even if I'm sent back to hell, I can still get back out of hell, basically, because we did, right? As a UDSF person, that's where the hope comes from, because it's like, hey, I survived hell. And because I survived hell, I have hope. And I can be a hope to other people because I survived hell and I can prevent them from going into hell. That's basically the whole point of hope energy.
And one of the things, so you've talked about UDSF types probably being the most successful octagram variant.
Yes.
I think that's one of the reasons, but also because I think if the UDUF type had more energy, they would be able to contend with that. But UDSF types are able to kind of self-generate from their shadow into their ego. These kind of this broader spectrum of cognition, and I think they're also able to really utilize three of the four sides of the mind consistently, because they're pulling from their shadow into their ego, and then they're aspiring.
Are you saying that they're potentially closer to integration because of that?
Yeah, probably.
That's a very fascinating point to consider. I never actually thought of that until now, and that's pretty fair. That's actually very, very fair.
One of the things we talked about in an earlier conversation is there's that famous quote about hard times create strong men, and you can take that entire quote and think about it in the context of the octagram. So here's the quote: hard times create strong men create good times create weak men, and weak men create hard times, right? And this is just a picture perfect quote of the Straussian and Howe turnings, and then the octagram movements. So that's a snapshot of the four variants. Anything else to say for any of the variants?
No, I think we're good on that. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about, like, you know, where Strass and Howe comes in terms of, like, you know, from a generational perspective, how these different energies, as we've applied to the four variants, actually apply to the generations. Right. So go ahead.
One thing first, I want to point people to season 23 if they haven't watched it yet, because I think it's your opening episode of season 23, How to Parent the 16 Types, is the most interesting exploration of these generational conversation that I've seen. And you talk about how there's hero generation, parent generation, which is kind of another way of capturing this. If you guys haven't seen that, I recommend checking it out. It's pretty cool. So for the generations, are we talking about my generation being decay, or are you talking about other things in terms of, like, the tempo wheels and things?
No. Well, we already discussed yours being decay, and then you know, my youngest son, his generation being more despair, and we're seeing how that's becoming a big problem. You know, because again, you know, I don't believe my own children have my own future, and that's why we work really hard at the Ego Hacker community to prevent it.
Taking the four variants then, and then, you know, Strass and Howe have these cycles, and then we think that there's a same cyclical thing within the octagram that, you know, if you look at a tempo wheel, you know, the top right tempo wheel, the top right of the wheel is SDSF, and then the bottom right is SDUF, the bottom left is UDUF, and then the top left is UDSF. So if you think about it in terms of the flow of energy, just like the flow of seasons, that there's joy, and then there's decay, despair, and then hope. So I think hope is spring, emerging from the dead winter. Joy is summer, kind of the quiet lull.
Hope springs eternal.
Right, hope springs eternal of summer. Decay would be fall, as things start to, move downhill towards winter, and then obviously winter being despair, where there's just this dead long night, and then eventually hope emerges again.
So generationally speaking, there's a joy generation that leads to decay, where we're at with Generation Z,
Right.
and then ultimately my children's generation is going to be in despair, basically, and then after that, then there's going to be hope.
Yeah, that I think according to their theory, that'd be the movement.
So what you're saying is that the work that we're doing within the ego hacker community now, with our nonprofit, with our women's program, with our men's program, and we're literally trying to produce the absolute best possible, most masculine men, the best possible, most feminine women, basically, through these programs, through our nonprofit, right now, while we're doing this. And we're doing it through our Discord, discord.gg/ego hackers, if you're not in there, and then just ask somebody, a community lead or a mod, and be like, hey, how do I get into the women's program? How do I get into the men's program, etc. We're trying to create men and women who are basically the envy of the world, the most masculine and the most feminine. That's what we're trying to build, and we're working hard to that end every single week. Because in effect, the final result of that is to create basically a new nation on the earth, not a nation, guided by blood or genetics, but a nation based on philosophy and principles of masculinity and femininity, etc. So right now, what you're saying is that what we're doing as a community here on the internet, or potentially, anywhere for that matter, we're literally sowing the seeds of hope right now. Because I don't want my children or any of y'all's children to not have a future. So we, right now, as a community, are sowing these seeds of hope, so that there is hope after that despair is coming. The coming despair, which potentially could be economic collapse. I mean, we're already looking at it with the Russians and the Chinese having their gold-backed digital currency, which is going to destroy the US dollar because it's not backed by anything. And then that's going to be a huge problem. And then also the risk of World War III as well. We have these huge, big potentials that are around the corner that our children are going to have to deal with. And there's going to need to be some kind of guiding light. There's going to be some kind of hope, right? Mm. So that's what we're doing. We're sowing these seeds of hope right now.
It's interesting because I think quite literally someone or something leads the hope in the despair that creates that eventual movement out of despair. It's like the smell of spring around the corner. And I think certain people can provide hope even in the despair and the decay. So, I mean, I think I already mentioned that I feel like your work a lot has been about trying to help people avoid despair and walk a maybe more prosperous path. So
yeah, much so. People need hope, because if the people, like it's written, if the people lack the vision, then they will perish, and that's what we're trying to do. Sow those seeds, get of hope, give them a vision. That way, because like the mission statement of the nonprofit basically is Jeremiah 29:11. For I know the plans I have for you, to prosper you, to not harm you, and to give you a future and a hope. That's the entire point behind it. And we're trying to do that by creating the most masculine and feminine women out there. And in an effort to destroy fatherlessness, because it is fatherlessness that got us into this state of decay and is leading to despair, ultimately. And we have to sow these seeds of hope so that one day it will be annihilated from the face of the earth, and then we'll never have to deal with this issue ever again. And hey, it may lead us into a new land of utopia, similar to what we have in Star Trek. I don't know, but until then, the work continues as we turn the hearts of sons to their fathers and the hearts of fathers to their sons, or else we're going to lose the earth. So, all right, cool. Are we good? Any other final thoughts?
I think we're good. I'm good.
All right, cool. Awesome. Well, thanks for watching and listening, folks, and we'll see you guys in the next episode.